Hello, my name is Lloyd and I am a sexist pig. So let's deal with that straight off. Not a pig, literally, just a man, and therefore a sexist, some would say. Man, sexist, night follows day, and pig completes the thought. Stick it on the end, feels like it belongs, man, sexist, pig. That's how I'm perceived, that's how all men are perceived, including those who support equality. And I'm one of those men, or sexists, if you like, who favour social justice and rights for women. And that's down to my mum. She was a lifelong women's lib supporter. And I always agreed with my mum, even when she was wrong, but she was right on that one. And I picked up the revolutionary fervour at home. But it's a bit tricky. If I claim to be a feminist in public, I feel like a bit of a fraud. Even though feminism appeals to my blokish side, a level playing field, I like that idea. A fair fight. Only a wimp needs a head start, and men aren't wimps. And feminism has been beneficial for men as well as for women. It's jettisoned a lot of stale, outdated ideas. A woman's place, the fairer sex, ladies first, that's all gone. So the campaign to liberate half of us has liberated us all, and it's still doing it. It's still raising expectations. Do anything, go anywhere, be anyone. That's the male ethos, and it's now the female ethos too. There's another reason, a slightly shameful reason for supporting equal rights. It's part of the romantic game. You say, I favour equality, hoping it may have some aphrodisiac effect. Not that women are deceived, of course, because to disavow sexism for sexual purposes is, of course, doubly sexist, or possibly triply sexist. I don't know, I've lost count. But I do support the movement. I'm on the right side, and most men are. There's more we could do, obviously, but it's our struggle too. And equality is about all of society, not half of it. But the odd thing is that men don't take part in this debate at all. We don't have a voice. We're not censored, exactly. We're just never asked to give a view on anything, on the history of the movement, or Emmeline Pankhurst, or Page 3, or shortlists. Absolutely nothing. Now that's slightly strange, slightly limiting. Only a woman can talk about feminism. It's like you can't study Egyptology unless you're an Egyptian, or you can't learn Turkish unless you're a Turkey. And men accept this total silence, and that's pretty strange too, because men usually want their views about absolutely everything heard absolutely everywhere by absolutely everyone, absolutely all the time. Feminism, not a peep. So I want to bring some equality back into the equality movement. I'm not out to reclaim the word sexist. There's nothing positive about supporting injustice. And I'm not launching a male backlash, feminism with knobs on. I'm just articulating the views of the ordinary bloke, or sexist if you like. And so the field is wide open to me. I'm going to talk about the suffragettes and prostitution and the washing up, the Yorkshire Ripper and Mrs Thatcher. All the things that feminists talk about all the time, and men think about but never mention. And since I'm here, I'm also going to explain why women become feminists. Yeah, I really am, and I'm sure all the women watching this will think, thank goodness, it's going to be explained to me at last by a man. So let's start here. Let's start with the suffragettes. Everyone loves the suffragettes. They produce votes for women. And men don't just love the suffragettes, we envy them, because we know what drugs they were on. Violence plus a sense of moral destiny is completely intoxicating. Put it like this. Yes, I'm kicking your head in, but there's a principle involved. And the suffragettes were posh too, and that adds a Buster Keaton element. Upper class women arriving in the West End, not to go shopping, to smash the place up. Though it must have been tempting. While you're there, pair of gloves, new corset, vandalised Regent Street, tea at Fortnum's. Anyway, the suffragettes were brilliant at grabbing the headlines, and that tends to obscure the fact that they were a minor offshoot from the suffragists, who were far more numerous. And the suffragists wanted a quiet, sensible negotiation over some cake. Now, men don't really like the suffragists. Their tactics were stupid and self-defeating. They would write to their MP and say, please give me the vote. Otherwise, at the next election, when I'm in that polling booth, I'll be trespassing. There was also the National League for Opposing of Woman Suffrage. Rather a clumsy title. All male, you would think, but no. In fact, at board level, it was split 50-50, 7 men, 7 women. Lower down, women outnumbered men by 5 to 1. And in 1914, this group lobbied Parliament with a petition asking MPs to ignore the suffragettes. There were 500,000 signatures, which sounds amazing, women opposing votes for women. Although when you think about it, it maybe isn't that amazing. If you're a rich woman, it's obvious. If you put the scullery maid on the same footing as the lord and master, then you've got communism, you've got the French Revolution, everything you hate and fear. And there were progressive women too, liberal women, who didn't want the vote. This is Margot Asquith. She was married to the Liberal Prime Minister, and she told Emmeline Pankhurst she couldn't support her because if women got the vote, they'd all vote Tory. So we don't hear a great deal about women opposing votes for women. Instead, we hear a great deal about this. Everyone knows the story, the Epsom races. Everyone knows the date, 1913, the Derby. The horse's owner was the king, of course. Anyone know the horse's name? It was Anma. Nobody knows what the odds were. This woman, Emily Wilding Davison, known to everyone, immensely brave, slightly reckless. She was trying to attach a banner to the horse saying votes for women. and it ended in disaster. It wasn't suicide. A return ticket was found in her pocket, which proves that she planned to catch the 5:20 from Epsom, not the 2:15 at Epsom. Yeah, it's still too early for that joke. Nobody knows who the jockey was. Here he is. That's Herbert Jones. It was his third attempt to win the Derby for the King, and he had his supporters. He received a letter that said, "I'm sorry for the abominable conduct of this brutal lunatic woman." That came from the Queen, Queen Mary, obviously not a sister. And now, how did he respond to the tragedy? Well, he killed himself. Well, not immediately. It was actually 40 years later, in 1951. His wife had died, he was depressed. So he attached a hosepipe to the car exhaust and turned on the engine. Very interesting, though, both these people, Herbert Jones and Emily Wilding Davison, are linked forever in the history of feminism, and they both took their own lives. The difference is, though, that here Herbert Jones was trying to die and succeeded. Emily Wilding Davison was trying to survive but failed. Now, if there's a lesson here about the relative competence levels of men and women, then I won't draw your attention to it. What I'm more interested in is this. Suffragettes produce votes for women. I said that a minute ago. Actually, that's not true. When it came to it, what they produced was fantastic publicity, and a century later we all know who they were and what they stood for and how they dressed and so on. Great PR, but politically they failed. Now, it's not me saying that, it's them. It was their decision. They cancelled their campaign in 1914 when the war broke out. Nothing happened for the next 4 years except that men with their stupidity and aggression engaged in mechanised slaughter on the Western Front, and that drew women into the factories and the warehouses and gave them independent status and money. And that produced an uncancelable leap forward, so that by the end of the war it was just no longer acceptable to exclude women from politics. So women got the vote because of male stupidity, male belligerence, and male votes in Parliament. Men changed the law. Now, that's not a very fashionable view. I don't even like it myself. I prefer the glamour and the horror and the romance of the suffragettes rioting in Bond Street and being arrested and going on hunger strike and being violently force-fed and finally winning the vote for women. That's a great story, but it didn't happen. Women had the vote for 20 years. In Australia, New Zealand, they were voting in the 1890s. Then that spread to Europe, to Finland in 1906, then Norway, Argentina, various states in North America. And the decision to empower women was made by men in all male assemblies who were under no immediate pressure to do anything. So they were feminists by definition. Here are some of them. They don't look like suffragettes, but they were. They were revolutionaries. Now, you may think I've got this the wrong way round, and instead of crediting men for bringing women in, I should be blaming men for keeping women out. But I say there's a wider perspective, which is that power in society is wielded in two dimensions, inner and outer. The outer dimension, dominated by men, is the world of politics and finance and industry and the professions. And the inner realm, the inner dimension dominated by women, is the power of homes and families and emotional connections. And for thousands of years, the division between the two was absolute. And then about 150 years ago, some people, reformers, said, well, hang on, women should join the male power dimension, because society can't progress if it excludes half the available creativity and talent and imagination. So and this movement was supported by men and women. And the men included John Stuart Mill, Karl Marx, Henrik Ibsen, Bernard Shaw, Keir Hardie, H.G. Wells, lots of others. So it wasn't women against men, it was revolution against reaction, and there were women and men in either camp. And some men changed their minds when it mattered, like this chap, Lloyd George, also known as the Goat, an affectionate nickname, no doubt. This is what he said when he was asked if he was taking his wife to the Versailles Conference in 1919. Why take sandwiches to a banquet? So not strictly a feminist, but when it mattered in 1918, it was under his premiership that Britain finally delivered votes for women. So he was a feminist in the end. Some people dislike him because of his private life. He was a womanizer, although that never gets thrown at a busy lesbian. She's just enjoying herself. After the war, men kept up their campaign for women's rights in the universities and the professions, which began to accept more women. The universities were run by men. They could have excluded women, but they made the right decision. And women gained their degrees and they entered the professions where it would be nice to say they were greeted with open arms. But no, they weren't. There was resistance. Now, this was bound to happen because professions are inherently conservative and they don't like new rivals or competitors, no matter where they come from. So some of the resistance was misogynistic, undoubtedly, but some of it was just plain old protectionism. And the point is that the reformers won. They defeated the misogynists, or they started to anyway. And in the 1920s and 30s, women became doctors and lawyers and architects, and they edited magazines. They flew around the world. Well, nearly. They made films. Forget that one. And then in 1939, the men started killing each other again. And the women said, how can we help this time, chaps? Women joined the military in important roles. They weren't just at fighter command, pushing those model planes around the big board with the croupier rakes. Women built planes, Spitfires. They flew Spitfires during the war, but only from the factory to the airfield. The official reason was to spare women the horrors of combat. And the real reason was hands off our toys. After the war, everything went quiet again in the 1950s, possibly because men stopped fighting each other. And I mention that because feminism has gained enormously from men's addiction to violence. And no one else seems to have pointed that out, so I just thought I would. And then in the 1960s came the single greatest advance in the history of women's freedom. There it is, the pill, invented by men. Why? Well, obviously to increase women's sexual availability to us. Okay, that wasn't the reason. Even if it had been a tiny part of the reason, it wouldn't really matter because the pill has spared more people more needless suffering than anything in history. It ended the 23 pregnancy marriage. It closed down the convents and the care homes where fallen women, in inverted commas, gave birth to unwanted babies in secret. And it dismantled the whole moral edifice of shame and fear that surrounded sexuality, which was great news for women and for men too, of course. But only if women fancied them. Now, ugly men, ugly kids, who rarely get a mention in feminist history, they lost out thanks to the pill. Because the ugly git was used to being let down gently, by a sensitive, tactful woman. I'd like to, but I can't take the risk. With the pill, there was no risk, so it was if you want your answers, just look in the mirror. So anyway, apart from for ugly gits, for everyone else, sex became a playground instead of a nightmare, and women didn't have to marry straight from school and have 18 kids. They could go to university, or they could plan their families. And they could start a career at the same time as having a family, thanks to the Open University. This was the brainchild of Michael Young. There he is. And he visited Russia in the 1950s, and he was amazed by the high caliber of physicists from every corner of the Soviet Union. He said to them, how can you train so many brilliant physicists in such a vast country? And they said, Michael, you see that little box in the corner? So he came back to England and told Harold Wilson about this marvellous idea, education over the airwaves, and and Harold Wilson brought it in 1969, and women took full advantage. So we're into the late 1960s now, great time to be alive, race riots, political assassinations, the summer of love, something for everyone. And women took to the streets, demanding more freedom, just like the civil rights marches in America. And again, that's, I think, the hidden hand of male aggression nudging the women's movement forward. But you knew I'd say that. The pivotal moment is this, 1968. This is the Miss America beauty pageant in Atlantic City. And we all know the story. Out comes the dustbin. In go the miniskirts and the high heels and the stockings and the bra. And a fire starts, and that fire goes around the world. Except that it's not true. It didn't happen. The women who were there said they didn't start a fire. The fire brigade told them not to. So the bra in flames was in fact invented by journalists, possibly male journalists, who stole it from these chaps. These are conscripts burning their draft cards. These are male conscripts, of course, so it's another male first for feminism. Thank you. You think that's pathetic, but then, I did say I was a sexist. So while we're on bra burning, a slight tangent, but while we're here, this is something that most men have really grappled with over the years, and I've read the explanations, and I understand that bras were the hated instruments of constriction, conformity and repression, and they had to be purged in the fires of revolutionary justice. Now, I understand that intellectually, but that only accounts for 0.2% of my brain on a good day. Mostly my brain is devoted to making contact with the female anatomy and removing any obstacles that lie in my way. Now, here we had women removing these obstacles voluntarily and setting them on fire to prove a point to me. This is like a kid at a sweet shop being told, it's all free, that'll teach you. Anyway, this protest was a great turning point in feminist history for two reasons. First of all, it wasn't about changing the law, it was about communications, etiquette, and the emotional language of everyday life, which had to be reformed. Secondly, men were not the main target. They were a bit. But the prime focus was other women who were being sent a message. Your sexual self-expression is just bondage to male lust and male power and male wealth. So in this new campaign, every woman on earth was being asked to uphold the dignity of every other woman. And this meant a new sexual code. Certain things were now outlawed. Dressing up like a dish of meat. Couldn't do that. Giggling blonde routine. No. Pretending to be stupid to get what you want. Or this one. Adjusting your boobs in mixed company when you feel the conversation's drifting away from you. Well, we've all done that. And along with this new code came a new fashion. A fashion of concealment. Flared dungarees, baggy jumpers, heavy boots. To hide the contours at breast, hip and ankle, and a buzz cut to top it off. Unfortunately, I'm one of those men who finds that look quite sexy. But anyway, I think this is a very strange development in the history of culture. It was feminists against femininity, although their name for it was radical feminism. I always thought of it also as the great bimbo crackdown. And that was the problem. It was too harsh and punitive, and it just went against nature because everyone tries to attract the opposite sex. It's a sport, and to play you need the right gear. So this campaign was doomed, but the leaders didn't care. They dug in, they became even more extreme, and they found a soundbite from the American writer Marilyn French. Here we are. All men are rapists. Maybe we can get it a bit angrier. And the spray painting began in the mid-1970s, and that's when I saw it first, age 14. I was pretty naive, fascinated by sex, but completely inexperienced, and I found this slogan deeply disturbing because I didn't think it was an opinion. I thought it was a statistic, and that's how I became the world's first virgin rapist. But that slogan, that attitude, cost feminism a great deal of popular support because it slandered the wrong people. It slandered mothers and families. It said every baby ever born is the product of a violent crime perpetrated by a sex fiend whom the victim has mysteriously failed to report to the police. And so it split the campaign in two, and the mass movement of the 1960s, with millions of supporters like my mum, dwindled into a rump of indignant separatists who lived and looked rather like medieval monks. Shaved heads like monks, sandals like monks, growing vegetables like monks, sleeping with women. And so this is amazing. That why and how did the women's movement break apart at that time? Now, I have an explanation, but first I have to utter an insult. Now, this is the worst insult you can deliver to feminists, and it's this. Congratulations on your victory. Equality has arrived. You have triumphed. Now, to feminists, that is the ultimate heresy, but I'll say it anyway. Women had won what they set out to win by the 1970s. They had guarantees on equal pay and equal opportunity, a ban on discrimination in the workplace, the right to enter any profession, and experience in virtually all professions. Now, if you compare that with 1914, what you have in 60 years is the fastest and most far-reaching revolution in human history. Nothing compares with it. Revolutions, though, are dangerous, especially at the moment of victory, because the war machine is in peak condition, but the enemy has gone. So a power vacuum emerges and the victors turn on each other, and I think that's what created radical feminism, which is still with us today, still thriving, more sophisticated methods and better hairdos. But in the early days, in the 1970s and 80s, it was very rough and ready, and it was anarchic, and it was fun. I remember there was a sex shop near where I lived in the early 1980s, and the feminists attacked it every week, gallon of Dulux all over the windows. And they would get arrested and fined, and that meant paying money to the authorities who were keeping the place open. So they had a better idea. Photograph customers leaving the shop. That's not an actual photo, but you get the idea. And they would publish the photos in a free sheet, which they delivered to local homes and libraries. And the customer appeared under the caption, Wanker of the Week. It didn't actually work, but believe it or not, the shop is still there. The feminists, they carried on attacking it. They didn't care. It was the 90s. Sorry, it wasn't the 90s, it was the 1980s. It was the height of the Cold War. There was a lot of division, a lot of violence. And the radical feminists got really stuck in, and they rediscovered the suffragette spirit. But this time they wanted more than the right to practice as a chartered surveyor. They wanted disarmament, peace, matriarchal government worldwide. In other words, Mother Earth ruled by Earth mothers, which isn't such a bad idea. So this worldwide revolution began just off the M4 in 1981 at Greenham Common. So I'll just do a brief 15-second history of Greenham. December 1979, the Soviet Union gives itself a Christmas present, Afghanistan. They occupied Afghanistan because that always works. 1980, newly elected President Ronald Reagan calls the Soviet Union the evil empire. Tensions rise. Best way to solve it, escalate it. America turns to its closest lapdog, us, and says, can we park some nukes next to Heathrow Airport? And we say, weaponised Berkshire. Why didn't we think of that? So the nukes arrive at Greenham Common. Meanwhile, in mid-Wales, Powys, a group of lesbian separatists decide to confront American imperialism with whatever comes to hand, namely a potato peeler, some lentil soup and a tambourine. It's a start. Oh, and bolt cutters, mustn't forget them. This is a key image in the history of feminism. There's something about women with bolt cutters that seems to divide opinion along gender lines. For women, it spells justice, and for men, it spells truncated options, let's say. So in 1981, the lesbians surrounded the perimeter fence at Greenham. And these women were utterly fearless. I mean, they encircled a military compound teeming with armed killers. They broke in, rushed the silos, got arrested and fined, did it all over again. They were the most violent pacifists the world had ever seen, and they were joined by women from all over the country. No men, it was announced, somewhat superfluously. We'd seen the bolt cutters. Behind this, there was another element, another incentive, hugely influential at the time, almost forgotten now. There was a desire to avenge the crimes inflicted on women during the preceding 5 years by this man, Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. And the Greenham women believed he hadn't been acting alone. Between 1975 and 1980, Sutcliffe murdered 13 women, mostly prostitutes, using a hammer and a screwdriver which he'd sharpened to a point on the concrete floor of his garage, and this led to the largest manhunt in British criminal history. There was a hoaxer, I should mention, in Sunderland, who diverted resources away from Bradford, where the Ripper lived. But all the same, the cops really did put in a spectacularly useless effort. They, in fact, managed to question Peter Sutcliffe 9 times over that 5-year period, and they never arrested him once, even though he bore a startling resemblance to the chief suspect. This image was circulated everywhere in the late 1970s in Britain, and it even reached the lorry depot where Sutcliffe worked as a driver, and his colleagues teased him about it. They gave him a nickname, the Yorkshire Ripper. Meanwhile, he carried on murdering women. Now, a lot of feminists and a lot of other people as well were very suspicious of the police. It looked like collusion. You know, the cops bungled the investigation accidentally on purpose because they were men. Men want to abuse and kill women, especially prostitutes. Here's a man doing that, so why stop him? Now, that sounds a bit paranoid, but feminists saw the same structure and the same perversion in the Cold War. It was men, in both cases, with their weapons, threatening blameless creatures. You had male predators, i.e. Sutcliffe or nuclear superpowers, threatening female innocents, Sutcliffe's victims or Mother Earth, with these huge willy-shaped javelins, Sutcliffe's screwdriver, nuclear missiles. Now, this is a compelling theory, and these women were completely sincere in their desire to neutralise male lust before it destroyed the planet. As it happened, the weapons were simply removed in 1991 following the collapse of the Soviet Union. So Greenham was not really quite the soar-away success that it's now claimed to have been. It's remembered as a great moment, a great lesson in solidarity and collective action. I'm not sure entirely about that. We haven't had another Greenham since. And I knew Greenham protesters at the time, and what they said to each other, not to me, to each other, was they found it cold, wet, scary and depressing, and they couldn't wait to come home. And I think that was the lesson of Greenham. Stay indoors. Don't hold a protest in a field in England all year round, you will freeze. And feminism took that lesson to heart in the 1990s. It migrated to the university campus, the lobby group, the employment tribunal, which are all centrally heated. And it began to win victories in court to enforce equal rights at work, which is a good thing too. And flushed with success, it began to look around for new battles to fight. And out came its old adversary, porn and lap dancing, prostitution, everything that might come under the label bimbo eroticism. And battle was joined in the mid-1990s. At that very moment, of course, bimbo eroticism received a massive boost from this organisation. The clue is in the title there, that's why it's full of porn. Now, I'm intrigued by this war between feminists and porn, because as a man, I'm never asked about it. No man is, even though we have a certain amount of expertise in this area. So I'll just offer a basic male view of porn, and you doubtless will perhaps disagree. Porn is feminism in action. It liberates women from skivvying and drudgery. It enriches them at the expense of men. It's an equal opportunities employer, no need for qualifications or diplomas. Any woman, no matter how badly educated or lazy, can make money in the sex trade, and she doesn't even have to get out of bed. Now, feminism takes a very different line, a more rigid line. It's about victims and abusers, female victims, male abusers, that's all. But not all women fit into that template. A porn star who produces erotic films is not a victim. The older prostitute managing younger women with male bodyguards is in control. A stripper working at home with a webcam and a banana, complete safety. And of course, some women pay men for sex. They're clearly not victims. Porn does produce victims, of course, but they aren't the full picture. Now, I don't blame feminists for getting this slightly wrong. It's because they don't have enough frontline experience. There aren't that many professors of gender identity working the midnight shift at Spearmint Rhino. The demand is there, but they're not there in the library having another strange theory about porn. And they go one foot further. They say that porn damages all women because porn equals violence. It's a fire starter. It encourages men to attack women. And they say that the imagery in porn is mostly violent, and they get their evidence from Google. Now, I Googled violent porn, and I got 15.7 billion links. I then Googled ordinary porn, and I got 20 times as many. Having done that, I destroyed the hard drive of my computer with a sledgehammer. But the point is that I was amazed how high this was. 1 in 20 men want violent porn. But is Google a reliable index of human behaviour? I also Googled how to shoplift clothes. I got 104,000 links, and I Googled how to become a genius, and I got 60 million links. So that means there are 500 geniuses for every shoplifter, according to Google. And also, porn existed before the internet on the top shelf. So if it was all about violence, you'd expect the top shelf titles to advertise their violent content. And here are the names of top shelf mags: Penthouse, Men Only, Mayfair, Playboy, Razzle, Big Jugs. There really isn't any violence there at all. You could ask rapists, have you ever watched porn? And they'll say yes. Hey presto, you've proved that rape is caused by porn. You could ask them, have you ever worn flip-flops? And they'll say yes too. So now you've proved that rape is caused by porn and by flip-flops. The thing is that all men use porn, not all men rape and beat and kill women. And I have to say that this theory, porn equals violence, sends a very strange message to the individual lap dancer. It says that you're turning men into predators, making women more vulnerable to assault, including yourself. Or, if you like, the way you parade around in front of men makes it likelier you'll be attacked. In other words, dress like that, you're asking for it. I've heard that before, of course, but not usually from feminists. But they're sticking to this theory, porn equals violence, because it works. It makes their campaign a moral necessity, and they're winning. In Northern Ireland, it's now it's been outlawed to hire a prostitute, and that could come to mainland Britain too, making it a crime to offer cash or goods for sex, which will spice up a lot of wedding anniversaries. Darling, not only is it our first time in a year, but we're risking jail. The campaign of the feminists, of course, has a secret weapon, slavery. They say the war on prostitution is aimed at people traffickers. And it's hard to argue with that, except to say that trafficked people do a lot of things. They pick lettuces, but we don't ban salad. So I think this deep animosity between prostitutes and feminists is very curious. And I find it very intriguing, and I think that it reaches all the way back to the origins of feminism, by which I mean the conversion moment, the trigger that turns a woman into a feminist. And I'm now going to explain this, how women become feminists at long last. And I think the conversion moment is puberty. Obviously a girl of 7 could say I'm a feminist, but all she's telling us is that her parents are pretentious. She only feels she's a feminist when she's 12 or 13, and that's when the injustice of nature really strikes home, and she realises how unfair it all is compared with men. Now, for a man, puberty is absolutely fantastic. It's like getting the keys to a Harley Davidson. See you later, kid. There's just no downside to it. For women, I imagine, it's very different. Puberty is like being incarcerated for a year with a mad plastic surgeon who thinks he's got a sense of humour. He can do anything to anyone. Completely arbitrary. The kindest, cleverest, most popular girl gets turned into a dump truck. Or, meanwhile, the stupidest, meanest, most unimaginative girl is turned into a goddess. And this is a terrible system, but there it is, nature. So a woman emerges from this ordeal with a street value, which is fixed by the mad plastic surgeon. And she can't hide her value because her value and her physique are the same thing. And her value is dropping all the time, faster than men's. So this must be horrifying to women, I assume. They must hate it, they must vow to fight it. But it's very complicated because, of course, some women do well out of it. They get access to all kinds of marvellous goodies and parties and travel and shoes, credit cards, thanks to this cruel, arbitrary system. What do? Use it or fight it, or a bit of both. It must cause conflict and anxiety, I imagine, every day. But of course there's one group of women who feel no anxiety, no conflict. They don't fight the system, they use it. It's their career. These are the sex workers, the porn stars, which I assume is very annoying to all women. But it's most annoying, I assume, to women who use the system least and who fight it all the way, the feminists. So I think it's personal, this struggle against the sex trade. I believe it is the feminists are grappling with a part of themselves. It's their emotional response to the trauma of puberty. Now, I haven't put this theory to a feminist yet because there are parts of my body I value. And also, this war is still in the balance because our culture is getting pornier. It's getting more exhibitionist. You can see it on the street, in the media. People think of sex as just self-expression. There is this is actually a creed, a political creed, which was started by Jerry Halliwell in the 1990s. Girl power. Have sex, enjoy it. Sex is feminism, which is what I said a moment earlier. And that was the girl power view. Women's lib and fornication are the same thing. And some feminists quite liked girl power at first because it was unstuffy, it had the youth vote, and it was classless, and that's a sociological term meaning that poor people liked it. And there were no boundaries. Anything a woman did was a girl power thing to do. But that was the snag. You couldn't define it or write an essay about it. The ultimate stumbling block with girl power was this. It endorsed this insult, this heresy. We're equal. We're equal, get on with it. That was girl power. And feminism doesn't like that because it makes feminism redundant. And feminism had faced exactly that heresy before in the 1970s when an insurrection arose out of nowhere, and it was led by a working mother from the Midlands with twins who took over a nuclear-armed state. You can't get more feminist than that. But the feminists couldn't bear her. Mrs. Thatcher, me too, as it happens. But this rift is usually explained as political. Thatcher right-wing, feminists left-wing. But it came down to the core philosophy. It was about what is feminism, a collective struggle, or is it just smash and grab? Use what you've got to get more of what you want. That was Thatcher's view. She once said, in one of her humbler moments, I'm as good as any man. And she set about grabbing things from men all her life. She grabbed a safe seat in Parliament, grabbed hold of the Tory party, grabbed control of Britain, started wars with Argentina, with the miners. She had a habit of winning them as well. And that's why a lot of men liked her. She was a female impersonator. Basically, Mrs. Thatcher was Britain's first transgender Prime Minister. Now, she wasn't, her view, equality is ours, let's get on with it. She wasn't the first one to cause that problem. This is Barbara Castle. She joined the cabinet in the 1960s, and she was asked, what are you going to do for the feminists? And she said, nothing. What have they ever done for me? So there's an interesting rift here. The collective power of women doesn't favour the individual who grabs power on her own. But this rift doesn't show because powerful women are very rare to antagonise the rest in public. In private, this is what Mrs. Thatcher said about feminists. They're poison, I hate them. But she only said that virtually in secret to the historian Paul Johnson and decades after she left power. But I'm not sure she'd really approve of the latest weapon of the feminist collective, the feminist lobby, which is all-female shortlists. And I'm just going to comment on these because I noticed as a man that all-female shortlists are not for all females. So here are some women who are on the list. Yeah, she's on the list. Yes, and she's on the list for the Priory. And that's the point, where's the childminder, the nanny, the midwife? Where's the dinner lady? Where's the single mum? Where's the waitress on the shortlist? These shortlists are for Oxbridge Sloane Rangers. Now, there's nothing wrong with them. Some of my best friends, as they say. But is this feminism or is it favouritism? And there are, of course, men who say they support the shortlists. But this is what they're actually thinking. A bit more skirt in the boardroom. Nice. And I think the shortlists send two signals. One is that women will never be equal, and the other is that being female is some kind of disability whose victims need help integrating with humanity. And the message seems to be this. It seems to be, I'm a woman, please help me. Imagine Mrs. Thatcher saying that. I was more, I'm a woman, God help you. Now, the shortlists apparently are sending useful messages to the schoolgirls of today, who are the champions of tomorrow, we're told. And the message reads, do anything, go anywhere, be anyone. And that's a great message. Unfortunately, the shortlist changes it to this. Do anything, as long as the interview's rigged. Go anywhere, the quota system will take you. And be anyone, you can guilt trip men into letting you be. So that encourages the champion schmoozers of tomorrow, the champion operators who know how to network and get in the back door. Fine, men have been doing that for years, but it's not equality. Equality would mean male shortlists in female-dominated professions, childminding, the Anglican priesthood, and witchcraft. Every coven in Britain, 2 wizards. That's equality. Now, the feminist lobby, like all lobbies, exaggerates the power of its enemy and exaggerates the obstacles it's up against. And the feminist lobby does this by inventing male bias. And I noticed this because I'm a feminist. And I've been trained to detect bias. And I quite often read articles that make this argument. PMT hasn't been cured because men don't suffer from PMT. There are some strange assumptions here. Men don't suffer from PMT. Well, some of us do quite regularly. The other assumption is that only men can do science. Deeply sexist. And also there's the assumption that men could cure PMT, but they haven't, so that women will suffer. I promise you, men do not like women suffering. And here is Exhibit A, this little gizmo we invented. That is a spin dryer you can sit down on. And there's someone just off to test it. There's also bias in comedy. We're told men outnumber women because men don't find women funny. But, you have to ask, how did Mae West get started, or Lucille Ball, or French and Saunders, or hundreds, thousands of female comedians playing every night across the world to mixed audiences. Or Roseanne Barr. This is one of my favourite gags from her show. She's in the kitchen, her friend's reading the paper, and her friend says, a woman in Oregon stabbed her husband 26 times. And Roseanne says, I admire her restraint. Now, is that only funny because I said it? No, I think it's much funnier when Roseanne Barr said it. What about this? Friends. Clearly the girls were dragging it down. It should have just been Joey, Chandler and Ross and call it Chums, and it would have been a real hit. The reason men outnumber women in comedy is the same reason that men outnumber women in stockbroking and lumberjacking and deep-sea fishing and computer hacking and tossing the cable and spotting trains and robbing banks and murdering politicians and darts. Women don't fancy jobs like that. It's pink and blue. We like different things. That's why we attract each other. And that's why we spark off each other. And it's why we love each other. And we do love each other. Now, I mention that because it's so odd to bring that into this debate. So I'll do it again. Men love women. I'll go one further. Women love men, with some exceptions. I know there are bumps and dips along the way, but essentially, our relationship is the convergence of opposites for the benefit of everyone. We're dissimilar, and that's what draws us together. And I'm not totally convinced that we're exactly the same, and that we deserve the same, and that we'll be locked in an endless civil war until we get the same. I don't think we are, and I don't think we will. So that's really about it. That's as much as I have to tell you. Apart from one final thing, our silence, men's reluctance, to pontificate on the subject of feminism. It's in case we blurt out the truth. the whole thing worked in our favour in the end. Our workload has gone up by 5%, maybe 10%. Bit of hoovering, dusting, collect the kids from school via the pub. Women's workload up by 100%. It's doubled. A woman has to have the perfect family plus the perfect career, having it all, which of course that means doing it all. The ideal woman has to be a pencil-skirted city high flyer with a boob job who's got plenty of spare time to bake flapjacks for her 7 adorable children who tumble around her Cotswold farmhouse while her bilingual SAS-trained dot-com millionaire husband chops firewood in the Arboretum. Anything less than that and she's a loser. And the pressure is constant. As we know, a girl of 5 is bombarded by ideals of physical perfection, which are impossible to live up to, and also by ideals of spiritual perfection, which are equally impossible. Feminism obliges women to maintain the dignity of the sisterhood or suffer the shame of the sisterhood. This is very tough. And then women say they got their freedom all on their own without men. So this means you doubled your workload and we weren't involved. Well, if that's the argument, then that lets men off the hook again. Because that means that we're free to enjoy the fruits of the revolution without a qualm. And that's what we do. And women today are miles better than they've ever been. They're ambitious, they're well educated, they're hardworking, they're sexually uninhibited party animals who watch football, take drugs, drink beer, crack jokes, start companies, make fortunes, and pay for dinner. And a man who lets a woman pay, I'm not making this up, is secure in his masculinity. Yeah, you bet he is. You just bought him a bottle of wine and now you're taking him home. You handed him the guarantees of his masculinity on a plate. And this is lifestyle you created and we had nothing to do with it. Well, that's the deal of a lifetime for us. No wonder we're keeping quiet about it, which I probably should do as well. Otherwise, the other chaps will get annoyed with me. So that's all I've got to say. But thank you for watching.